Welcome to the Have More Fun podcast. In this episode, I talk with Amina Brown about what to do when you don't feel like you're enough, how to be married, and what it really means to be cool.
But the interesting part about when people speak truth to us, there's something inside of you that knows what they're saying is right. I wish that God could give an audible voice right now and chime in on this conversation, because God would be like, I'm sorry, what you say about her? Yeah, she really does need that.
A few years ago, I decided it was time to start seeing my therapist again, because sometimes life catches up with you and you need some outside perspective to recalibrate. One of the conversations that she and I had was about paper cuts. She explained to me that everyone at some point in their lives feels stuck because we all pick up things along the way that we wish we weren't holding. And sometimes it's big things like loss or addiction or abuse or secrets that feel too shameful to say out loud. And so we just put them on our backs and lug them around for 40 years. Or sometimes you're like my friend Brian, who picked up a Woody Woodpecker tattoo on his thigh that seemed like an awesome idea with his frat brothers in college, but then you show up to a pool party 20 years later and suddenly find yourself Googling things like, how painful is laser tattoo removal later that night as you lay in bed? Brian, if you're listening, you know that I think your tattoo is hilariously awesome, and I find it even more hilarious that your mom didn't find out about it until you had kids of your own. So back to my therapist. She explains that sometimes there are those big things that we carry around with us, but then there's something else, and that's what she calls death by paper cuts, which is when you experience a bunch of little things over the course of the years that you think shouldn't impact you, but then one day you realize that the cumulative effect has created this gaping wound that you didn't know was there. And it isn't until you start realizing that you have overwhelming anxiety or exhaustion, or have started to shrink back to not get wounded anymore, or have a looping soundtrack of thoughts in your mind that are so horrible you wouldn't wish them on another person. And then it is in those moments that you realize that maybe it's time to start working on finding healing. And what I'm learning is that one of the first places to start as we begin to do the work to fix our wounds is with our thoughts, and particularly what we believe is true about ourselves and our experiences and how God feels about us. Because whatever we focus on becomes what our brains believe. Because it's a fact of neuroscience that our brains want to prove us right. So if we believe something, our brains look for proof to back up our beliefs, whether those beliefs are right or wrong. I learned about an experiment recently on how the power of our thoughts impacts our physical bodies. In the 1990s, a researcher named Ellen Langer took two groups of men ranging in age from 70 to 87 and sequestered them away from their daily lives for 10 days. Both of the two groups went through an initial battery of tests to determine baseline hearing, eyesight, cardiac output, pulmonary function, blood pressure, weight, and visual appearance. One group was instructed to simply go about their days as usual, but the other group was instructed to live as though they were in their prime. Pictures of them in their prime were posted on the walls. There were magazines from that time and TV shows playing in the background, TV shows that they would have watched back when they felt their best. And at the end of the 10 days, all of the baseline tests were repeated. Every parameter in the men who lived as if they were in their prime had improved. Their cardiac output was better, pulmonary functions healthier, and all the things we think deteriorate with age had improved. Moreover, they all looked 10 years younger. A game of touch football even broke out among the men who were living in their prime. The control group didn't have any improvement at all. No wonder we feel anxiety and exhaustion in our bodies when our minds are stuck in loops that are convincing us that we aren't enough, or that are condemning or negative about who we are and our self-worth. Another fact of neuroscience is that our brains get good at whatever we do most. This is called neuroplasticity, and it is the ability of our brains to change. So if we start something new, all it takes is repetition, optimism, and discipline to change the way we think or respond. Dr. Carolyn Leaf has done extensive work on this topic, and I highly suggest you check out her books if you're wondering how to change your thought patterns. Another person who's sparking incredible conversation around this topic is Amina Brown. Amina is an author, spoken word poet, and speaker. She performs and speaks at events all over the world, including MomCon, which, side note, will be in Louisville this year in September, so mark your calendars. She and her husband, DJ Opdigi, reside in Atlanta, Georgia. She's the author of 5 spoken word albums and 2 nonfiction books, including her most recent book titled How to Fix a Broken Record, where she talks about how she is confronting the truth that sometimes the hurtful words of others and the failures of our past determine what record we play the most in our mind, keeping us from speaking up, pursuing our dreams, and growing closer to God. And what I love about Amina is that she is vulnerable, honest, and hilarious all at the same time. I read her book in 2 days because I couldn't put it down, and I can't wait for you to hear from her. And so here is my friend, Amina Brown. So Amina, you joined us at MomCon last year, and were totally the highlight of the entire weekend. I'm still hearing about the talk you gave and how deeply it touched everyone who heard it. And I don't know if you were there at the beginning of the weekend. I think you might have been tracking down lost luggage or something like that.
Yes, I was.
Yes.
And lost makeup, worst of all.
You have priorities. But on the first night when we all gathered together, we asked every single mom in the room to take out a piece of paper and write one thing on there that felt too heavy for her to carry. And we asked her to let us carry it for her for the weekend. And so I brought that box home that was filled with every single piece of paper that the women had written on. And a couple days after MomCon was over, I sat on my floor in the office and read every single piece of paper. And there were deep and heavy things on those papers, but I have to tell you, about 90% of them said the exact same thing. And that was one sentence. And that one sentence was, I feel like I'm not enough.
Yeah.
Have you ever had that phrase on repeat in your own head?
Please. All the time. All the time. And in different, areas of life, that phrase. And in some ways, I think that phrase is one of the hardest phrases for us to shake in our life, because we typically started to believe that very early for a lot of us. So it's not something that we started, in our 30s or in our 20s. Like sometimes there were some things even that happened in our family life or in our childhood that started kind of pressing on that message. So that can be a really hard phrase to recover from, or to do the practice that it takes to not believe that, to really put more truth into our souls that says, there isn't this bar that you have to keep jumping up to and hope you meet it. That the best thing you can be is who it is God made you to be. And that's, that has its own vulnerabilities, I will say. It's easy to say. And when you're actually living your life and, trying to really believe, like I actually, have sort of 2 thoughts about the phrase, I am enough. My sister-in-law, who actually came with me to my first ever MomCon a few years ago, she always says to me, she says, I really don't put a lot of stock into the phrase, I am enough, because maybe I'm not. And God is supposed to be the one who is always enough. And she's one of the first people that I ever heard say that. And I was like, so I feel like I take the both and on that. I think there's a lot to what she said, that when I go, well, maybe I'm not enough. I'm a human being and I make mistakes and I have insecurities and I don't have it all together, but God always has it all together. And I can put my trust in him. I think that's a part of it. And I think there is this element underneath that phrase, or the healing that comes when we don't try to carry that phrase with us, which is I can only be who I am with what I have right now at this time. That's it. And I can find some grace in that for myself, and maybe find some grace for other people too,
I literally laughed out loud on an airplane when I read your chapter about marriage lessons. And especially like the alternative love languages you have discovered. Oh my gosh, hilarious. Will you just tell all of us, enlighten all of us about the alternative love languages?
Yeah, I think, I haven't been married very long. I've only been married 6 years, but however long you've been married, you're always going to encounter couples that have been married a bit of less time than you. And so they're always, wide-eyed, and for us, we only been married 6 years. Whenever we meet engaged couples, or maybe they've been married a year, they're looking at us to tell them, tell them all of the things, all of the secrets, or whatever it is, And one of the things I always say, especially if I have an opportunity to just talk to the wife, sort of woman to woman, I always tell her like, hey girl, you're going to read a lot of books, and there are great books on marriage, and I want you to read them and get all the skills they teach you, but I'll tell you what they're not going to know. And that's how to be specifically married to your husband. You will not read that in a book. And so that's what made me write those marriage lessons, because I thought, what are the things that like were never going to be said to me in a book that are so true about my husband? And my husband like really loves fried chicken. Like it's very important to him. It's not a game. He really, he really needs this. It's very necessary in his life, So for his birthday, I think that was this year, I actually had an event, and I finished up with the event the morning of his birthday and like flew in so I could try to, be home that night when he, finished his DJ gig. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and fry this man some chicken. And he was like, I am married to a woman who fries chicken on my birthday. Like it was like I gave him, $100,000. He was happy about it, and like that's something that makes him feel loved. If it had been pot roast, I don't know, if he would have felt the same about it, and like he's that serious about Waffle House. I wrote about that in the book, that he's like, I don't want you to go to Waffle House unless you call me and tell me you're going so I can meet you there, so I can get a to-go order. I was like, Waffle House? For real? He was like, yes, So just recently, like a few weeks ago, we were out late and he was like, let's go to Waffle House. And normally, like, I'm not really a Waffle House person, but I'm like, you know what? This man loves to go to Waffle House. Let's go. We can have these hash browns. We can make it work.
But do not split the soup or dessert. Is that correct, too?
We do not split the soup. We do not. I actually had a friend of mine tell me she was at a restaurant recently and overheard two people having the conversation, or one person was like, we'll split the soup. And she was like, oh no. She texted me like, you never split the soup. And I'm like, how do you split soup anyway? Like, you're not getting two separate bowls. Like it doesn't make any, like you're going to put your you're going to slurp that together. No.
That piece of advice on how to be specifically married to your husband, dude, that's a gem. Love that. You could write a whole book on that, I feel like.
I'll come back for a second book. I'll work on that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so there was another chapter in your book, and actually, I think it's toward the beginning, where you talk about the myth of cool. And I have to tell you, I've been thinking about that idea ever since I read it, because so much of my life, I have wanted to look cool, which I interpreted to mean trendy and aloof and always in control and all these other attributes that don't naturally like happen in my life. And so I just really loved how you reframed the conversation to say, you're already at the cool table, so why not enjoy it? And for some reason, that just really made so much sense. And this whole year, this coming year in my life, I've made the new goal of what would it look like to simply have more fun and not to worry so much about cool. Yeah. Do you have ways that you cultivate fun in your life?
This is a good question you've asked me, Mandy, because it's like I'm a person that loves to laugh, but I have actually had on my list of like self-care practice for 2018, one of my goals to work on is to really commit to having more fun in my life. And back in therapy, because it's necessary. And my therapist was saying to me recently, she was like, what do you do that fills you up, that refreshes you? And she was really encouraging me to separate that from the things that I do for other people. Like, what is the stuff that you do that's like, it's your fun stuff that's like just for yourself? And when she told me that, Mandy, I really had a tough time at first thinking, like, especially when she said separate that from other people. And I'm like, whoa, like what's that, because, like you may have different friends that you're like, oh, we always do such and such together. Or, if you're married, you're like, oh, my spouse and I, we always go and do that together. But, just thinking of like, what's the stuff I do for just myself that's fun. So I've really been on a journey of discovering that. And I'm going to tell you one thing. I'm going to confess to you, even though it might make you laugh.
Okay.
One thing that I started doing for myself over the holidays that ironically has brought me a lot of joy is watching Real Housewives of Atlanta.
Yes. I love that so much.
I just started watching it over the break because, I just had time. And then I was like, oh my God, like, I love watching this show because these women have more dramatic lives than I do. This is great.
So, like, did you go back and, like, binge watch through past seasons? Are you, like,
Yes.
deep in the archives?
Yes, I started from the very beginning and just this week finally, like, caught up to, like, the current season. And it's just been so great. But, like, that is something, because my husband doesn't enjoy it. It's like anytime he sees me watching it, he'll be like, oh, you're watching your show? And I'll be like, yeah. And I turn back to talk to him and it's like a vapor. Like he's disappeared somewhere else. We don't know where he went to. But it's like a thing that I really enjoy watching it for myself. And so that's like one thing that is actually really fun to me. Or I love cooking. I love watching Top Chef. I love figuring out how to cook different things, that I've never cooked before. So those are things that I try to do that are like really, really fun to me. But I think it's interesting that I know for me and probably for a lot of people, it can be hard to sort of peel back the layers of what is my stuff that I like to do that's fun to me, separate from my identity that may be attached to my relationships to other people,
Totally. Okay, so when I went to order your book on Amazon a couple months ago, I saw a review on there that caught my eye. One woman said that she devoured it like a piece of chocolate cake after Election Day, which totally made me laugh.
I have to go back and read this.
It was so good. There were so many like hilarious reviews on there. But so that totally caught my eye, made me laugh. And I have to agree, though, it is comforting and encouraging and offers hope even when things feel overwhelmingly disappointing. In fact, in one chapter, you talk about God's ministry of disappointment. And you say, our journey to one day having children has not been blissful, innocent, joyous, or as easy as I expected it to be. It's been a journey of loss, heartbreak, delay, doctor's appointments, test results, delays, stress, frustration, more appointments, more delays. Hope seems to be a liability, too expensive to carry in the face of so much disappointment. What thoughts do you have for anyone who at this very moment feels like hope is a liability?
Sis, that chapter itself was the hardest chapter for me to write in the book, because I think whenever any of us are walking through disappointment, number one, it typically always goes on longer than we wanted it to or than we anticipated it would. And in a lot of ways, it's lonelier than we might have expected it would be. And I think writing that chapter was really interesting for me because it's a chapter that I didn't want to write it while I was in the middle of the journey. I really wanted to get to the glorious end, where you can be like, well, we went through that hard thing, but look, these amazing things have happened since then. And it's a lot harder to say, we have went through this hard thing and are still sitting in the middle of it. And it was important to me, even though it made me cry my eyes out to write it, it was important to me to write it because I hoped that other people, other women in particular, who may be walking through disappointment in various stages and areas of life would realize, first of all, that you are seen and known while you sit in this disappointing place that may not have an immediate end or an end that you can foresee right now. That you may feel lonely, but that you are not alone there. I think that's a huge thing when you're walking through disappointment. You just feel so alone and so wounded. It's so wounding to be disappointed either for a long period of time or to go through a season of life where everything feels like it's falling and crumbling around you. So that was one thing that I hope women in particular gain from that And I think also I wanted to say, and some of this came up in my talk at MomCon last year, even though I didn't intend for it to, but maybe that's what God meant for me to say. But some of that was coming up, and kind of what I wanted to articulate in that chapter too, is just to really say, like, you're going through this thing and it's really hard and painful. And I'm never going to tell you, don't worry, it won't be like that soon. I want to tell you, I don't know how long it will be like that, but I know that God is with you. And I know that God is good. And I don't know how this will make sense in the way we can perceive God's goodness. But I do know that God is good. And I don't say that to anyone going through disappointment to say, shove those, sad or hurt or angry feelings you feel, in a bag somewhere and forget those. I say, sit in those feelings, that God can be present with you there also, even if you have not seen where your disappointment may end. And I'm saying it to you, Mandy, and it's tough for me to say because it's super hard, and it's not the bow ending that I'd love to tell people, but I think it's really true to how it is when we go through hard things, that God is with us even when we may not be able to make sense of how the story is going to write itself,
Totally. And I think you have the gift of giving words to all of these feelings and thoughts and complexities that we are all living and navigating and yet can't make sense of. And so I just so appreciate how honest you are and how you have created space to live in the middle of a story without rushing through and without making that bow on the end the ultimate goal, because the present in the middle is just as hard and at the same time beautiful as that bow is at the end. And so your honesty is such a gift to all of us. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So a couple of years ago, I remember sitting in a convention hall with you, and we were filming for a MOPS video that we were doing. And you were talking about creativity. And you were sharing about how, as an artist and just who you are, you experience the world in the smallest details. And you were talking about how you notice the different ways that the people you love scuffle their feet on the floor when they walk, or the variations in how someone squints their eyes when they laugh. And I have to tell you, that has stuck with me ever since I heard you say it, because so much of life is noticing, and it's noticing those small, intimate details. And for me, noticing means surrendering to the small. It's letting go of how I think things should be, and instead letting it just be what it is. And do you ever have to work at that process of surrendering?
I wish that God could give an audible voice right now and chime in on this conversation, because God would be like, I'm sorry, what you say about her? Yeah, she really does need that. She has to work on that all the time. Yeah, I constantly actually just feel like, and I'm sure I know I'm not alone in that either, but surrendering to God, truly, really giving God control, is so hard for me, Mandy. It's so hard. Like, I have so many moments of life where I'm like, I do not want to keep learning this lesson. And God's like, give it up. Just give it up, I love to know how the story is going to get written step by step. I don't want to be left in the dark. I don't like to leave things to chance. We were talking about, being with a spouse who's total opposite of you. And my husband's also like a very spontaneous man. He could just walk right up in the morning and be like, it's Tuesday. And he's like, let's just go get some donuts. I'm like, it's not donut day. It's not donut day today. Today is the day that I said I was going to go get in those files. So we're going to have donut day on Saturday, when that's the day I've planned to be spontaneous. We're not going to do that on a Tuesday, in the middle of the day. Yeah. So I'm sort of that planner personality. And I really, honestly, it really just becomes for me this idea that I just think I know better than God does. I just think I'm smarter than he is. And some of it really plays a role in like what I believe about God. I have this idea of God that he's busy, that he's busy all the time, that he's like a Wall Street man, who's running around with his suit and he barely has time to eat lunch, So in my mind, I'm just being a good assistant when I help him with my life. I'm fixing a thing so that he doesn't have to worry about it while he's going to his power broker meeting or whatever. And that really boils down to me constantly having to really see the Lord again and really see God as God is, and not as I may have made God out to be in my mind, that God is not busy in the way that I view that. God is busy in the sense that God is always at work, but God's not busy like he's scatterbrained and he's, letting the balls drop. He's forgotten, these things that are important, that God is always attentive and always present. So that's my big area with the Lord, where it's always like, yeah, surrender that. What people think, surrender that. That project you're working on, surrender that. Your health, surrender that. Those areas where you're disappointed, I'm like, I hate surrender. I wish it were a cuss word. I don't want it.
There is a section of your book where you talk about finding your voice, and you say, telling someone how to find their voice is like telling someone the exact moment they will feel comfortable in their own skin. It just doesn't work that way. Both journeys are a winding path of learning to care about ourselves, which will in turn honor the voices and the thoughts of those around us. And then you share about participating in Java Monkey Speaks, a Sunday night open mic in Georgia, where after a few weeks, Megan, who is one of the frequent readers, gave you some feedback, and she said to you, when I hear other poets' work, I feel like I get to know them. But when I hear your work, I don't see you. I don't get to know you. How did you take that feedback, and how did you let it fuel your fire to use your voice instead of kind of debilitating you to not perform or to not put yourself out there?
It really messed me up. I think it might have kept me up that night, actually, when I went home, because there's like a weird swirl of feelings I felt when she said that to me. In part, I felt like, who are you, girl?
Seriously.
Like, you don't know me, girl, to be saying this to me. But the interesting part about when people speak truth to us, there's something inside of you that knows what they're saying is right, that knows you should listen. And so I think that's really what kept me up, because I wanted to really lean on some arrogance there and be like, you don't tell me, girl. I know what's going on. I don't need you to say, But then when I got home and sat by myself, I was like, yeah, she's right.
Isn't that the worst? When someone says something and then you're like, no. And then deep in your heart is like, yeah, that's accurate. And then having to face the truth of that.
Yes, like it's very humbling. So in a way, for me, it took a lot of humility to really think through what she was saying and do the work that it would take to show up in the pieces that I write, and I think that's true whether you're a writer or, even in our friendships or just in the spaces where we live and work and, or with our families and friends. It takes some bravery to show up as yourself. But what else do we have? That's who and how God made us to be. That's how we should show up,
What was your first step in showing up in a more, authentic's not the right word, a bigger way?
I think the first thing, well, I feel like there were two parts of it. I think one part is I sort of had to go dig underneath, like, why do I believe I shouldn't show up? And for me, that was connected to what I thought was being spiritual, that I thought the best way to shine of God was to be invisible, was to not be seen. And when I really look at God's word and look at the truth of Jesus, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. Like, we're talking about a God who created a beautiful world and created each creation unique. Like, if that were a God who could only shine if his creation were invisible, then he would not have made this technicolor world the way that he did,
Okay, I have one last question for you, and it's my favorite question to ask everyone that I get to talk to. And that question is, what is the best advice you never got?
Enjoy it. Like, it's just the one kid, enjoy it. However many kids, and they're that age they are, like, enjoy that. Enjoy where you are. Be where you are. I feel like I heard a lot of advice about what I needed to do, hurry up and do for my future, and, what I needed to hurry up and do to fix this and that. I wish I'd heard more. Enjoy where you are. You're only going to be there for a short amount of time in the long run. You'll look back at that time and go, man, that time's over. I'm never going to get that time back. That's what I wish I'd heard more of.
That's brilliant. I feel like I need that reminder on a daily basis. Thank you so much. I just am so grateful for your time and words. And you are a huge favorite with our audience. So really grateful.
Thank you, Mandy. I appreciate it. And I just have so much love for MOPS and all of the leaders and mamas and women involved in it. So it's really my honor to be able to speak into the lives of so many amazing women.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Now go out and have more fun, and don't come back until you do.